Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Law Enforcement and Media Today, the complexity of credible coverage. I'm your host, Stan Rhodes. Both law enforcement and media have missions to inform and protect the public. Their methods are different, but credibility is the key for both. Getting everything right in today's society is complex because of a variety of factors, mainly the speed of information dissemination and the proliferation of cameras have caused a distrust of both law enforcement and media. So how do we help the public better understand how law enforcement and media influence each other? It's very complex. So we're going to break it down into three parts. First, we'll talk about the current climate of the relationship between law enforcement and the media. Then we'll try to figure out why things are the way they are. And finally, we'll look at how we can all fix it. Four people with very different backgrounds are with me today. Let me introduce them. Harold Rochon is a captain with the Detroit Police Department. He began his law enforcement career in 1985 and has worked in a variety of units during his many years of service, including gangs and violent crimes. Yolanda Fernandez is the Community Awareness Manager for the St. Petersburg Police Department in St. Petersburg, Florida. She handles media relations, social media, and community relations. Before joining the police department, she spent 30 years in the television news business, where she worked as an on-air reporter and anchor. Lane Mickelson is a group news director for the Sinclair Broadcast Group. His career in television began with a job running teleprompter. From there, he became an award-winning videographer and newsroom executive. He's been a news director at several local television affiliates and a corporate news executive for Gannett. Scott Libben is a fellow at the University of Minnesota School of Journalism and Mass Communications. He is a member of the Radio Television Digital News Association Board of Directors and is chair of the organization's Ethics Committee. Well, welcome everyone. I want to first begin to do a quick survey to find out individually what your thoughts are about the factors and where we are with the current climate of the relationship between media and law enforcement. Yolanda?
Well, I think in the national picture, I think the perception of law enforcement has suffered a great deal, and media is partly responsible for that. But I think on a local issue, it remains as it always has been, kind of two-sided, adversarial sometimes and partnering in other ways on stories.
Mm-hmm. Scott?
I think the level of anxiety is a little bit elevated. I think there's some unease, even between people who have worked together for many years, as Yolanda suggested, watch stories at the national level and wonder how that might impact relationships locally. So it's a challenging time.
Mm-hmm. Wayne?
It tends to go market by market. I work with a lot of different television stations, and I go to the station in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where that reserve officer accidentally shot the guy on the street. There is no trust in that market between the police department, the media, or the public. But I also work with a station in Washington, D.C., where Chief Kathy Lanier is very outgoing. She's always out there talking to the public and talking to the media about what's going on. And so there's a different level of trust in that market.
Mm-hmm. Harold, your thoughts?
I think that locally, I think is great. Our chief, James Craig, always talks to the media regularly. So it depends on the reporter. You can always tell when they're new reporters because they amplify things a lot more than they should be, I think.
Interesting. Let me ask you, Harold, and we'll go back around the room here. What do you think the biggest change has been with law enforcement over the years? What's your biggest change?
Education, I think. More law enforcement officers are more educated than they have been in the past. Everybody's on edge because all the things have happened throughout the country. Mm-hmm. But I think that the police are the police, and I think that's going to stand forever, I believe.
Okay.
I really feel like law enforcement has closed ranks. That it used to be, I was a photographer on the street, I could walk up to a street cop and say, hey, what's going on? And he would tell me. But he would trust that I'm not recording that, I'm just curious, so I know what direction to go, where to stand, where not to stand. And now I really just get, hey, move back. While standing in front of me is 5 neighbors, with their phone, taking video.
Okay. Scott?
I think ubiquitous video is the biggest issue. I think that accounts for a lot of the closing of ranks. It would have been difficult 20 or 30 years ago to imagine an era in which almost everybody has a camera at almost all times, and soon that will include police officers as well as the rest of us.
Yeah. Yolanda?
And I think social media has added to that, because not only do you have the cameras on every cell phone, but you also have people that are continually posting every second of the way. And so I think officers tend to be a little more suspicious, because they know that at any point, anything that happens could end up going national.
So you're now on the police side of things, and you had been on the television side of things. I don't know that you actually have left one or the other, but let me ask you the follow-up question. What has been the biggest change in media from your point of view?
Well, I think before, media used to have to try to confirm everything and take everything into account before they released information. Now there's a race to get it out there on Twitter first. Whether it's right or wrong, just get it out there. And from the law enforcement side, of course, investigations and arrests, investigations, and even trials can depend on what's released early on. So you have to be very careful, and that's a big problem.
Is there a distrust between law enforcement and media?
Yes.
How so?
Absolutely. Because media sensationalizes a lot more than I think they should. And I remember years ago, I heard a reporter say, if it doesn't bleed, it don't lead. That's a problem for us, because sometimes it's reported and it's not totally true. I was involved in a situation, and I read the newspaper and I saw the story on the television, and it was not even close to what actually happened. But it sounded good.
Right.
And although I wasn't the person involved in the officer being killed, it didn't sound good for us as law enforcement officers. It didn't sound good for us.
Right.
And I think sometimes we're already in some areas not trusted by the public. I think sometimes when the media reports it, it creates even a bigger wedge. But again, in our city, I can say that our chief allows us to speak to the media regularly, especially if we're there. If you know it, then you can talk. If you don't know it, don't guess. You know, give the facts and the facts only.
Okay. Layton, do you find that to be true? If it bleeds, it leads?
I find that to be true depending on the market. But I don't see that so much now in television. If we were in the 1980s or 90s, yes. But what we're really discovering, the public has less of an appetite for that, because they already know. It's already in their Facebook page. That a television station, to be successful nowadays, has to bring something that I don't already know. But I think part of the distrust has come from inconsistent behavior, you know, looking at it from the media side, from law enforcement. That when the officer saves the woman in the car accident, boy, we get that video right away. But if the officer had shot the woman, well, we can't release that because it's part of an investigation.
Okay.
Well, the car accident is still part of an investigation. And so instantly there's a distrust that, well, they must be hiding something, because yesterday they gave us video, but today they're not.
Harold, do you feel that there's a sense out there, a feeling that people don't like police? I mean, with all the different stories that have been in the news recently that are negative, do you feel that there's a distrust, a dislike?
No. Criminals don't like us. I think the citizens like us. I think that, you know, I often tell, like, who's, you know, the
But
don't
is that only
snitch
true
policy.
in Detroit, or you think it's different?
I travel around the country, and I talk to citizens and law enforcement officers everywhere. The criminals don't like us. So it goes to that 20-20-60. No matter what you do, 20% of the people are going to love you. No matter what you do, 20% of the people are going to hate you. It's that 60% in the middle. And I think that 60% in the middle, I think they like us. They like us more than they dislike us, or they trust us more than they distrust us.
Yolanda, I'm curious about how you track media coverage within your department.
We keep a very close eye on it. Of course, we have our own Twitter page and Facebook. I follow all of the newscasts in the market, and I also have a service that tracks anytime St. Pete Police is mentioned. I am able to look at the stories when they aired and when they came out in print or online. And I think it's important because I want to make sure that the accurate facts are getting out there, and I want to see how the police department is being portrayed, because more and more now I think law enforcement agencies realize that they almost have to do their own PR, because if not, they'll get lost.
What kinds of stories are you talking about?
Well, we monitor all different kinds of stories, but for example, I use our Facebook page as a way to put out stories that might not necessarily attract a reporter's interest right away, but many times they'll see it and they'll see the video and say, you know, that would make a good story, and they'll call me, want to do more on it. So we use our social media as a way to put different sides, different stories out there about the police department, and put a different face on it.
Do you find that reporters are following your social media page?
Absolutely. I put something out on Twitter, I get a call immediately. You know,
So
no
how
doubt.
has social media changed the face of media and law enforcement? Scott?
Well, I think the fact that there's now a deadline every minute does ratchet up the pressure on journalists to produce content. It does not and should not lower the bar for accuracy. There's no defending inaccurate information. Sensationalism is a more subjective term, to be honest about it.
So
But
let me back you up. When you say a deadline every minute, what do you mean?
I think journalists no longer feel that, gosh, my next newscast is 5 o'clock this evening. You know what? The next time I'm expected to deliver information is as soon as I can. It's,
Okay.
I got to post, I got to
Breaking
tweet,
news.
I got to write. Whether it clears what used to be the breaking news bar or not, journalists are expected to be constantly generating content.
So is it social media that has changed that?
I think that's one huge factor. And I think we are still so early in the social media era that we're really only beginning to learn from the empirical data, from experience and from research, how social media really work. And in the earliest years of it, frankly, I think it was unfair to journalists to expect them to constantly generate content when they didn't have adequate guidance on how to do that and what some of the significant differences were between an evening news broadcast and a tweet that I send out 30 seconds from now.
Okay. Lane, what about the 24-hour news cycle? How has that changed things?
Yeah, as Scott has mentioned, the expectation is you're presenting information as soon as you get it. And we, as journalists, I think we're still trying to hold, and I say I'm not sure we're delivering on it every day, that level of confirmation, that we want to confirm that the information is good. But in today's society, the journalist puts out that tweet, and then the retweet or the Facebook post comments or what comes after that often changes the dynamic of the conversation. The journalist may have put out a factual piece of information, but after that, the conversation can change dramatically because the public becomes involved in what they think happened or what someone told them happened.
So how has that changed things for you in law enforcement with the 24-hour news change, with everything happening so fast?
Well, we try to get out ahead of it as fast as we can. Yolanda put it best. I mean, you know, some of the stories are the negative perception stories, perspective stories, get out a whole lot faster than the positive ones. So our department does exactly the same thing that St. Pete does, is most of the positive stuff that happens, they put it on Facebook or they tweet it out there to let the public know. And a lot of times the media get a hold of it, but they don't see it on the news a lot unless it's something huge that an officer does. But we do things every single day that I think are huge, where we're not shooting people, where we're going in the buildings, saving people's lives, that building's on fire, or we're pulling people from cars that exploded, or we're one of the officers in Detroit, a little girl was shot and they took the baby to the hospital, and then they went back afterwards and supplied it with Christmas gifts and toys and things like that. That doesn't get sensationalized, or doesn't get put on the news as often as a police officer shoots somebody or takes somebody down to the ground.
Right. Yolanda, how much time would you say you spend correcting bad information?
It's not so much correcting, but making sure it's complete. And one of the issues we have are with these pseudo-journalist types that use social media and online now to go and put their own message out with their own slant and don't have to worry about confirming facts, don't have to worry about FCC regulations, they don't have to worry about any of the rules that journalists are supposed to adhere to. So they are just some citizen on the street, but suddenly they have the same power to reach a large audience, and they can make it sound any way they want to. And those are the ones that sometimes cause us the biggest problems.
So Scott, is there a code of ethics within the social media group?
Well, there are a number of codes of ethics out there, and I think each one of them for each major journalism association tries to reflect the realities of social media, and I think I can speak for the Radio, Television, Digital News Association, but I think the same is true for the Society of Professional Journalists and others. When I say you don't lower the bar because the deadline is immediate, it doesn't change your standards. You're responsible for what you report, And as Yolanda said, I think journalists understand that, but not just anybody with a smartphone or a Twitter account is a journalist. And I think some of those distinctions, especially among our critics, are too often lost.
And I think one of the thing that's often missing is the police chief of a department has never sat down and talked to the news director. Not to the news directors, but say, you know, the CBS affiliate news director comes in and just has a conversation with the chief about here's what we're trying to do, and the chief saying here's what we're trying to do. And in the television world, news directors last about 2 years. So this could turn over all the time. But I've often seen where the chief meets with all of the news directors and they bring all the news managers, and it's a little like a sermon from the mount. You know, here's what you need to know about us. But I think if they sat in a room together and talked to each other, they would have a much better understanding of what each other is trying to do.
Talking with each other. Well, Elaine, let me continue with you about what are there newsroom policies concerning retweeting and re-reporting information from social media?
Yeah, almost every newsroom has policies about most things in terms of information. And there's still a very strong sense of two sets of eyes, that let's have somebody see this before we do it. Where that step gets lost is really in Twitter, when you've got a reporter in the courtroom and you're counting on their professionalism to say, oh, here's what I'm going to retweet out. But before they start that, you hope that they have read the Twitter policy or the Facebook policy, because almost every station has one.
Harold, since information changes pretty rapidly with an investigation, can social media keep up with that pace?
No. No, not from our side, because there are things that happen that you'll never know about until it's completed. A lot of times they'll shoot stuff out that's not factual, or like Yolanda said, it's not complete. We cannot expose everything that we do in an investigation to the public as soon as it happens, because a lot of times it interferes with the investigation. And then, of course, as soon as you put anything out, you got 100,000 people calling saying they know it, they know it, they know it, when we find out that most of them don't.
Right.
I'm just curious to find out ethically what some reporters think, or is it more important to get the story out, or is it more important to get the facts out? That's my curiosity. Sometimes it sounds like it's more important to get the story out than get the facts out.
Well, that would be a question maybe to ask Scott in some of your classroom situations. How do things get handled there?
Well, everybody remembers who got it wrong. Nobody remembers who got it first, right? If you have to make that choice between being first and being right, I don't think there is a self-respecting journalist in the country who would have a tough time making that decision. You want to be right. That's what people remember. Not everybody is a journalist. I think it's worth saying, though, in defense of social media, that some of the things that go most viral, some of the things with the longest tail, are the stories about that police officer who stops and buys a sandwich for the homeless person or helps the child. I see a lot of that on social media, and I see journalism and news organizations picking up on those stories as well. So I don't think we should leave the impression that it's all bad, that social media and journalism can never function to get a positive message out.
I want to say there is one benefit to it from a police agency, and that's that I know that we recently had a homicide. We received 87 tips through Facebook, and these are direct messages from people that normally would not want anything to do with police, don't want to be seen talking to a police officer, don't want a police officer, police car out in front of their home, don't want anything, but they feel comfortable sending you a message that way, even though you have all these other anonymous tipping, mediums. So in that way, we're reaching a different segment of our audience and of our constituency that we didn't before.
I like social media. I mean, I'm not a part of it directly, but I like it in terms of getting information and finding out some stuff that's on, or possible things that are taking place.
Is it a love-hate relationship?
For a lot of people, I think it's a love-hate relationship. I love it most of the time, and I hate it most of the time.
It's great for getting road closures out.
Yes.
I mean, I'd love that. You have a major roadway closed and you need to let people know about. Twitter's the best way to do it.
And I just want to say this one thing. We've used recently, in my office, we've used the media to get persons of interest out, and we've been, over the last 6 months, tremendously successful in apprehending people who are involved in crime because of the media. I'm not against the media at all. I just want them to report the facts.
Gotcha.
That's it.
No, I was going to say, we haven't reached the tipping point yet where local news and information centers, which used to be television stations, are judged by their overall coverage. They still continue to be judged by what they put on the box, by what's on television. But if you look at a lot of stations, they reach many more people on their Facebook pages or their Twitter feeds than they actually do on TV. So while that story may never make it on TV, they may have reported it, but only 2% of what ends up on Facebook with your friends ends up in your Facebook feed. You may have never seen it. You may have never been exposed to it, but it likely was out there.
Yolanda, a question for you now that you are doing what you're doing. Is there anything that you wish that you had known earlier about being in the police department when you were a reporter that you now know?
Sure. One of the things is that I always thought that the police knew everything as soon as that crime scene tape went up, and they just weren't telling us as a reporter. Now I realize that there's just so much work into getting accurate information, and it is very difficult to build a case and in order to make an arrest. And that's something I thought, well, you have DNA evidence, run out and arrest him. Well, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
You still have to build that case, because once it goes to trial, you can't go back and say, boy, I wish I had run fingerprints on that person, or boy, I wish. And that's why, especially at the very beginning of a major crime scene, it's really important that you preserve that scene.
It's very important.
And I get that now, I didn't get it before.
Okay. Well, let's talk about it, and I addressed it in the beginning of the program about the proliferation of cameras. It seems like everyone has a smartphone, some way to record images or video. So how has that changed media coverage? Scott?
Well, I can't speak for police officers, but my sense is, and what I've heard from them, is that they feel they're constantly under a microscope. That they can't operate the way they used to with any latitude, even for proper behavior. And I can kind of imagine what that might be like. But I have to say, I think it's easier for all of us if we could operate without scrutiny. And I think that a certain level of scrutiny is appropriate. As Yolanda suggested, there are things we don't know about the jobs and expertise of others. But it has changed the dynamic, and I think it has led to some defensiveness on the part of some police officers who really became accustomed to being able to do their work with a certain level of secrecy.
Mm-hmm. Harold, what do you think? What's your response to that?
I agree with them 100%.
Okay.
The cameras are not all negative. They're not all negative.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times when people make complaints against us as law enforcement officers, the cameras is what clears us. So there's an absolute positive in having the cameras. But I agree that when you do things right, it's still scrutinized when it's on camera. And why did he use his left hand as opposed to his right hand? And I can tell you some stories that took place recently that's hit the media about some of the law enforcement being involved in some deaths of some individuals in the country. How it was scrutinized, and it wasn't as it appears. I guess that's the best way to put it. It didn't happen the way it looked like it happened. It happened, and there's a backdrop to it as opposed to him being shot or the guy in New York being choked. There's a backdrop to all that, but the society doesn't care that there's a backdrop, that there's a reason for it. We talked about the lady who was arrested and she was thrown to the ground. Only thing that they saw on television is she was thrown to the ground.
What Captain is talking about is what in journalism we call context, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing happens in a vacuum. There's always something that happened just before that camera rolled. There's always something more to the story. And what we try to teach in journalism schools and what we try to encourage through the ethics work we do as professionals is that you provide meaningful context. I mean, you can't rewind to the beginning of time when you tell a story, but you can provide those contextual elements that really complement and augment the facts, make it a fuller and better story.
And I think if you look at journalism organizations, especially local journalism versus the 24-hour cable network, that's their goal. Do they always reach it? No. But what's on social media, what's all over Facebook, is the 12-second video where the woman gets thrown to the ground.
Right.
And then what's coming into the local newsrooms is, why aren't you telling us the whole truth? And it's like, we're telling you the facts as we know them, but because that fact doesn't line up with their narrative, now they're mad at the police because they haven't told the story. They're mad at the news media because they haven't told the story that is on their Facebook page.
So, Lane, how do you decide? Who decides really what video to show and when not to show it?
Ultimately, that video goes to the news directors. I mentioned earlier the reserve officer in Tulsa. Our television station in Tulsa got that at 2 o'clock in the morning and did not run it in their morning newscast because they didn't have the context for it. Because the police weren't talking.
And that was the concern, not
Yeah.
to be taken out of context.
Because they said, we don't really know what happened. All we have is this video. Now, did other stations in that market run it? Yeah, they did. But our station said, we don't really know what's going on here. We need more information to run that. And I really wish that more stations were asking that question. The other thing that we do with our television stations is say, the first time you run the video, it has to be in real time. Because oftentimes you watch TV and it's instantly run in slow motion, or they show you the still. And it's like, there's no context there. When you see that video happen in 10 or 15 seconds and you start to think, what's going through an officer's head in 10 or 15 seconds instead of, oh, I'm looking at this one frame. So we have policies about when to show video, and ultimately it becomes the news director's decision. So you just can't plug and play.
And when the Chicago Police Department released the video of the shooting of Laquan McDonald, generally the only thing that aired most places was the last few moments of his life. But I can tell you that the police department released almost 30 minutes of that video, and every news organization I know had access to what he did for 28 and a half of those minutes before he was shot. I think that was the right decision to make. I don't think it's incumbent on television stations to devote their entire newscast to it, because 28 and a half minutes was just, the officers arriving and watching this guy. But that's context, and so we shouldn't assume that just because it's not on air that somebody hasn't made a responsible editorial decision about that.
I think also the public and the media don't always realize that even the most mundane of calls can turn into an officer safety issue, can turn into a life or death situation, which it's not always those cases that make the big, you think, well, it was just a shoplifting case. Why did he throw her to the ground? Well, maybe the week before there was somebody who had a gun and could have shot the officer. So they deal with those cases all the time, and those cases don't get a lot of attention. So that when there's a case, oh well, why didn't they shoot him in the knees? That's when I always love. Yeah, in a split-second decision, it's very difficult to do that, even if you're well trained.
And we're not even interested in shooting people at all.
Right.
The vast majority of law enforcement officers are not interested in hurting anyone. Does it happen? Absolutely. There is an officer safety issue that comes into play. And not just an officer safety issue, there's a public safety issue that's just as important that comes into play. We make certain decisions about these smaller crimes that take place. It could go, the guy in New York, I guess he was selling cigarettes, and then next thing you know, he's dead. Is that good or bad? Well, it's a lot of things that come into play that the citizens don't take into consideration. I think sometimes the media doesn't take into consideration. And you bring up the sensationalism of some of these stories. Don't play that story until, well, do you lose money when Channel 2 plays it before you do? Because everybody's watching Channel 2 and they're not watching Channel 7. Is Channel 7 losing money?
Our hope is we're not. Because when they come to us, they're like, oh, they have information the other guys didn't. They provided me something other than just showing me the video.
And sometimes a video can look so much worse.
Yes.
Even in something that's done appropriately, where somebody's fighting police officers and it takes 2 officers to take them down safely and restrain them, it can look bad. It can look bad because you have basically a couple of people grappling with each other in a brawl. Well, what are you going to do if the person doesn't give up easily and they're a threat? Sometimes there is a legitimate use of force. It just never looks good. It never looks good.
So what is media's responsibility in this case? When you have something that doesn't look good, you know the tactics are a little bit questionable, how do you handle that?
The one thing is you do let the facts get in the way of a good story, right? There are all these old axioms, if it bleeds, it leads. Never let the facts get in the way of a good story. That is the journalistic equivalent of the belief that a police officer can shoot the gun out of somebody's hand, right? I mean, these are cliches. The fact is we ought to let the facts get in the way of a good story. These stories are complex. They're complicated, as you indicated at the outset. And it's our job to understand the whole truth of a story to the extent that we can. That's why we ask good questions. Sometimes they may seem to the people we're questioning to be over the line or extraneous, but we try to inform ourselves as well as we can in order to make the best possible decisions. There are time constraints. There is deadline pressure, but I think it's commendable that some news organizations have recognized, as Lane Station in Tulsa has, that it serves not only our community, but frankly our credibility and our brand better to make the time to make a good decision. You can't just take it. It's not always there. We're going on in 20 minutes and we could tweet right away. But you know what? We're going to make a conscious decision that we want to be the station that didn't rush to judgment on this. We think that builds trust.
But you might have social media that is not going to adhere to any of that.
That's right. And I think the question is, do we hand over our editorial decisions to the police department or to social media? No, that's our job, right? On police cars, it doesn't say to hold the powerful accountable and to give voice to the voiceless. Right. It says to preserve or to serve and protect in most cities where I've been. Our missions are different. They do overlap. We have some things in common, but we're not in the same business, and we have responsibilities that police officers don't.
And many times journalists, they do work with police. I had a case recently where a journalist found out about a case that we've been working very hard to put a very bad person in jail for this particular offense. And that journalist found out about it early on, and I was able to say, look, you can do the story first, but give us a few days to finish our part, because if not, we're not going to be able to put this really bad guy in jail. And they did work with us, and it worked. It worked mutually beneficial because they understood the reason behind it.
And I have to say, it happens all the time. I mean, I assume Lane experiences this as well. You hear about the cases where police and journalists clash, where they have irreconcilable differences, and somebody breaks a story before the police want it done. You don't hear about the dozen other cases where there was the kind of conversation that you're advocating. And journalists on a regular basis agree, all right, let me check back with you in a day or two. Don't string me along forever. Tell me why you can't tell me now, or tell me why you're asking me not to report this now. And you know what? More often than not, responsible journalists will agree to that on a limited, defined basis.
We have a good, let me say this, because I don't want people to think that I'm against journalists, because we have a great relationship with our reporters in Detroit. I have a good relationship with most stations, with actually all of them. I know somebody in every station, and I have a good relationship with them. And they call me all the time to get information. Sometimes they want it so fast because they want to be the first to get it out. But we do have good relationships, and they help us a lot. It's just that, and I'll use the new ones. You talk ethically because you teach at a college, but you can tell the new ones, and I don't know what the how they're rated, but some of the new ones, they'll put out information that's incomplete a lot faster. And I've developed a relationship with some new ones and say, slow down, I can give you this, as Yolanda said, in a couple days or a couple hours, just wait. I'm gonna give this to you, but please don't report it until I just wanna make sure that what I'm telling you is absolute gospel.
But what about the uncontrollable force that's out there, and that might be the internet, the social media, the blogger that releases things you don't want out just yet?
Well, yeah, I have no control over that. I can't.
No, so what do you do? What do you do in that case?
Now, you try to put out the correct information, and you try to be as transparent as possible without harming your investigation. I mean, nobody's trying to hide anything on purpose just for the sake of hiding information. I mean, as far as law enforcement, we work for the community, so we're trying to do the best for the community.
I will say, as a journalist, the worst justification for reporting something is that it's out there, or people are going to hear it anyway, right? I don't think that relieves journalists of the obligation to make their own decisions, even if everybody else is going to make a bad one. I want to lead the newsroom that made a better decision.
Yeah, when I'm reading social media, I'm always looking for the attribution, but I don't think the public is. And that's why in the presentation in the newscast or in anything that a station is presenting in terms of news, we have to attribute where we got the information. You're reading things about a police officer shot somebody, and I'm going, well, what city did this happen in? Why is there no name listed here? And it almost feels like we need to put out a how-to guide to understand whether this is real or fake, because there's now hundreds of fake news sites all over the internet. And people are taking them as gospel, and they post it on your Facebook page like, why aren't you guys reporting this? It's like, because it's not true.
Or dredging up old things that occurred 10 years before and were caught on video somehow, suddenly showing up on the Facebook page, and people from all over the nation getting upset over something that has already been resolved, and that person's already been disciplined or removed from the department, and the department's taken steps to correct the measure so it doesn't happen again. And once you explain that, a lot of people will say, oh, okay, well, I didn't know. But still, your agency's flooded with phone calls, so you're having to deal with that problem on Facebook. We've had that happen a couple of times because things never die on the internet.
Well, the other voices in the narrative, we can go back to Ferguson, and you have all of these people, many, many people saying they saw the officer shoot with the guy with his hands up. The
Well, I'm going to
investigation
have you
doesn't prove
pause
that.
right there, because we're going to continue our conversation about that in just a moment. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Net Anonymous, where nothing you say or do is ever really private. You know, like the rest of the internet, it never goes away.
Hi, my name is Benji, and last time I checked, America's still a free country, right? Beer's still not illegal, right? So how is it that me posting pictures online of me and my friends enjoying a few adult beverages on the weekends is a violation of the employee handbook and cause for termination? Conduct unbecoming. That's what the lady in HR said. What does that even mean? I was drunk and passed out. How am I responsible for the fact that my buddies changed the homepage on my work laptop to a porn site? I mean, it's not like I told them to email the link to the entire company. It's not like I was just no-showing every Monday either. If I want to call in sick for a hangover, isn't it my time to use?
Net Anonymous, because you're not anonymous.
Welcome back. We've talked a lot about the problems with and the complexity of credible coverage. Now let's talk more about some possible solutions. And we've talked about the proliferation of cameras. Let's talk now about body cameras. They seem to be the latest thing, and that seems to bring up a whole new set of issues. Harold, Yolanda, who wants to talk about that?
One of the biggest problems with the body cameras is the cost. I mean, people think it's so easy. Yeah, just put a camera on every cop. But the storage of all that video, the accountability, then being able to redact that video for other bystanders that might be caught on that video when you release it. I mean, it's just an enormous, enormous undertaking. And I think, for example, in our state, we had agencies using body cameras before we had state statutes deciding how it should be released. So still a very new issue.
Have there been some sort of guidelines how it's going to be used, how long the information will be kept?
That's all depending on the state and your own public records laws. So every state has to decide that, and then internally as a police agency or a law enforcement agency, you have to have your own policies for use and storage as well that comply. So it's not something that you can do overnight. It's something that seems very easy, just throw a camera on every police officer, but it's very complex.
Harold, what about your department?
Our department is we're getting body cameras.
You do not have them yet, but you're
They
going
do
to.
not have them yet.
Okay.
It's complex in many ways. You talk about citizens not wanting to be on the camera. That comes into play. The law comes into play. Being scrutinized on every single level comes into play. Even if we're doing every single thing right, it comes into play. I'm old school, so I'm not sure where I'm at with it yet, but it's the way we live. It's the way it is. I just think there's a level of privacy, I think, that goes into play as well. We're open to everything now. There's a camera in every house, every room, every pole, everything. And in law enforcement, we're using cameras to fight crime. It's an excellent deterrent, absolutely a deterrent. It's a deterrent for officers who are involved in criminal activity, or officers who are involved in force who go overboard. It's a positive, but I think there's a negative to it as well from where I'm sitting.
What is the negative? Is there a distraction?
It's not really a distraction. Now, if it's released to the public, now it's scrutinized on every single level. But the camera doesn't go inside your brain when you make a decision. When I make a decision, although you see it, unless you're inside my head, you don't know why I made that decision, that when to shoot and not to shoot, or he could have waited, or why didn't he shoot him in the knee, or why didn't he just fire in the air? We're not interested in, most police officers are not interested in killing anybody. I'm absolutely not interested in even shooting anybody or hurting anybody. But could that become part of my job? Yes. But I don't want to scrutinize to the point where I can't sleep at night wondering if I did something wrong. My heart says I did everything right. My brain says I followed policy. But now I'm being judged by thousands of people who don't know the department policy. It's being played on television over and over and over again. And it's been played on social media over and over again. And there's I won't say the majority, but there's a large number of people who were against me before I shot my gun, and now it's more against me because I shot my gun.
I think some of the skepticism that journalists express about this has to do with the speed with which video can be released when it vindicates an officer. You know, we can get video very quickly sometimes. In the case of Lavoy Finicum, this man out in Oregon who was shot by officers and agents out there, that aerial video became available almost immediately. Not before some people were able to claim that he was lying on the ground and had his hands up at the same time. I'm not sure that's even possible. But in fact, the video was released so quickly, and it did appear to vindicate the officers.
But on the other hand,
well, journalists will say, gosh, when it's a good story to tell, we seem to get that video a whole lot quicker.
There's a case like this that is playing out in the Ohio Supreme Court right now, that the prosecutor's office released dash cam video 1 week of an officer doing something really well, and then 2 weeks later there was body cam video where an officer shot somebody, and the department refused to release that video. And so 4 stations and the newspaper all went together to sue the department. It is in the Ohio Supreme Court. There's been no decision, but it's interesting that the prosecutor is working really hard now to get the case thrown out, because he did eventually release the video. But the stations are going forward because they're looking for a consistent policy.
And that's why it's so important to have those policies. And remember that it's not just from the police side, but it's from the public side. Think about when the police are at someone's home. Usually it's not the best day of their life. Usually something wrong has happened. It's something terrible, whether it's an accident or a crime. So the public's not at their best. It's not the best day of their lives, and that's captured on a camera. And then what you were talking about as far as it hurting investigations, a lot of people don't want to talk to you if they know that they're going to be on camera, and that could be released, where they might talk to an officer kind of privately and tell them something behind closed doors. They don't want to see that on a camera, on a video.
It is complicated, but there also is some precedent. We went through a lot of these same arguments with 911 calls when we began recording them. When and under what circumstances can they be released? How do we safeguard people's privacy and at the same time exercise maximum transparency? These are not simple issues, but it isn't without precedent either.
And
does the video have to be released?
And from an investigative perspective, we cannot always release this stuff so fast. I don't know the ins and outs of the Ohio case, but what I do know is this. If there's a police officer shooting or any shooting and there's video, sometimes if you release that video too fast, before the investigation is complete, the video does not tell the story. The video tells one portion of the story. There's a lot of things that go into play. And say we're looking for somebody, or someone's wanted, or there are a number of things that are involved in that particular case. So we release the video. The perpetrator involved, who should be going to prison, can't go to prison because he's been biased because of the video's been released, or it's been released too soon. It causes a negative for us in terms of our prosecution, or even picking out the bad cop, if you will, because his video went out too fast. Sometimes you got to wait and see. You know, yeah, the good thing happened, the good thing happened. It is what it is. But the bad thing happened, there's an investigation involved in it. And sometimes the investigation does not allow us to release a ton of information too soon.
And I think Yolanda
due
probably
process.
deals with this all the time, is that if you pull the local television or local reporters aside and say, look, there's somebody on this video that we're looking for, and that's why we're not releasing it. That's confidential information. You know, we'll let you know when we can. They're going to have a different style of presentation than the sound from the podium, which is we can't release it because it's part of an ongoing investigation. That's like the buzzword of there's something there they don't want us to see.
But how long can you hold on to that? We can't give that to you right now.
As long as it's part of an active investigation in the state of Florida, you have the right to hold it. And every state is different, and that's where it becomes a little trickier, and you have to have established policies. And that's one of the things. In our department, the police chief is kind of waiting for the other departments that started it early to kind of see how they go and what policies work and don't. And he's on a number of task forces and committees nationally to look into it, so that when we do invest in them, because we figure we're all headed that way soon, at least we'll have those policies in place.
The scary thing is we're not too far away from having the technology for every cop to just wear a live camera. I mean, we'll be in the next 10 years, and people will be saying, well, they should just wear live cameras because they have the technology to do that.
And then you have to sort out how to use it, when to use it, what do you do with the video, and the same thing goes with what do you do with cell phone video and surveillance video. How does that all fit into this picture?
Well, the scariest scenario to me is when we get video from somebody and they say, well, we sent this to the cops, but they're not doing anything with it. And a good news organization will call the department and say, hey, what's going on? A bad news organization will say, well, the cops aren't doing anything, so let's do the story that the cops aren't doing anything. But likely what's happened is the cops are looking at it. But we don't know that until we ask the question.
What about when we have a situation where media says things happen this way? Law enforcement says, no, it happened this way. How do you sort those kinds of things out?
Well, attribution, as Lane suggested earlier, is one of the key tools of journalism, right? We don't just say it happened this way. We tell you, here's how we know. Here's where we got our information. When we're practicing our craft responsibly, here are our sources, or if we're not going to identify our sources, here's why we can't, or have chosen not to in this case. You know, you hope it never comes down to a he said, she said. There are conventions in our discipline that are designed to provide transparency and allow the audience, viewers, readers, listeners, to judge information and determine for themselves how credible it is.
Is there an issue or a problem with trying to authenticate the video that might come into your newsroom? And how do you go about doing so?
Yeah, we actually have photo guideline policies for authentication of video. I mean, you know, there's video of the Loch Ness Monster swimming through the streets of New Orleans. And so, you know, what steps you can take. Are you right every time? No. And the other thing that the public doesn't understand is who owns the copyright. If I take your picture, you don't own that image. I do, because I am the photographer. And so sometimes we're going down the wrong road because we're trying to figure out, oh, you know, where did Harold get this picture? But it's not Harold's picture to begin with.
And we need to understand as journalists too that sometimes video will vindicate the officer, sometimes it will seem to damn the officer, but often it's inconclusive. And I think that many of us have developed unreasonable expectations that there's always video and it's always conclusive and we want it right away. You know, sometimes there isn't. As many cameras as there are out there, sometimes there isn't video or it isn't conclusive. And I think that's the kind of complication that we are paid to accept and understand. We just have to exercise a healthy level of skepticism when it seems occasionally that the video is harder to come by in certain cases than in others.
Well, and then sometimes the public and the media don't understand the tactics. For example, we might release video of a robbery involving a gun. And then, but it might be a couple weeks after it happened, they'll say, well, what took so long? Why did you not release that right away so that we could help you find, you know, the bad guy? Well, what you might not know is that we already had a pretty good idea who the bad guy was. We were following him, and we thought we were going to be able to arrest him very quickly before he knew we were onto him. But he left town. and now we're trying to figure out where he's gone. So now we have to release it. So that whole thing, well, you know, what, are you lazy? Why didn't you release it for 2 weeks? You know, you can't get into all of those tactics.
Right, right.
Or maybe, oh, well, we had the girlfriend and we thought she was going to tell us where he was. And we thought we had her and we were pretty close to getting him, but.
And I understand that in some cases you really can't share that insight. In some cases, I think it can be shared with an upfront, clear understanding of the rules, these off-the-record conversations. I think it's important that police officers and journalists, before information is exchanged, explore exactly what the ground rules are. So if I want to tell Lane something, first I need to make sure we have the same definition of what's off the record. What does on background mean? I can't just dump it in his lap and say, well, by the way, I decided that's off the record, because it wasn't when he got it.
Yolanda, what kind of steps can law enforcement take to help build relationships with reporters?
Well, one of the things that I tell all of our new officers is, first of all, realize that you're on camera all the time. Whether it's from media or, you know, Joe Blow on the street, you're going to be on video sometime. And also to realize that reporters are doing a job. They're not the enemy. You can't take things personally. If there happens to be a story or a report come out that's negative against the agency, you can't just say, okay, well, I'll never again look at that reporter again. No, you have to take it step by step. And as a public agency, we have an obligation to work with the public in releasing information. That's just a fact of life. And we try to train as many of our officers as we can, particularly the lieutenants and the majors, to feel comfortable going on camera. Why not? They're experts in their field. Why would it always be the public information officer?
Interesting.
I think
Scott,
we've forgotten common courtesy. I go back to, you know, when I was a photographer 100 years ago, and when I would arrive at a scene, I would introduce myself to the officer, and normally we would shake hands, and then I'd set up my camera. It seems now crews just arrive and start. I remember a scenario there was.
Well, they're on the run.
Yeah, but it's just like, there was a scenario where there 2 semi-trucks crashed into each other, and I walked up to the officer whose name was Rob, and I said, Rob, what happened? And Rob said, one stupid driver ran into another stupid driver. And I thought, this is the greatest soundbite of my career. About 2 minutes later, he came back and said, Lane, please don't use that. And I said, well, Rob, why not? And he said, well, I didn't have my hat on, because that's a big thing in Minnesota to wear your trooper hat. And it's like, it wasn't because he didn't have his hat on, it was because he was going to look bad. And I didn't use it. But we called each other by name, and there was kind of just this common courtesy.
Well, what about ground rules? Scott, you've talked about ground rules that you must set in advance before sharing information. How do you go about doing that?
Well, there's nothing wrong with what Lane described, because that's a relationship of mutual respect that existed obviously prior to that encounter. I just think that, you know, we do need to accept the fact that each of us has a job to do. At the same time, it's fair to hold journalists, individual journalists, accountable, just as we hold individual police officers accountable. You know, if a journalist acts, you know, in a way, if you entrust a journalist with something and he or she behaves irresponsibly, you're not going to trust that journalist again. And I think even journalists catch on to that over time. And so the experienced reporters know. They have you could have burned that guy. You could have said, sorry, Rob, you said it, we didn't have an agreement, I'm going on the air.
I had a deadline.
What good would that really do, right? I think rational, respectful, responsible journalists understand that and act accordingly.
What kinds of discussions should happen in newsrooms when groups of people and cops gather and there are tensions?
Honesty. I absolutely understand that reporters have a job to do. Absolutely. But at the same time, I have a job to do. I think the most important factor in all of this should be the community that we serve. I think the news media serves the community, and absolutely law enforcement serves the community. So there should be a mutual respect for the community first. We put this information out, it should be respectful as it can be. It should be information that the community can use, whether it's about a homicide, about a robbery, about a good cop, bad cop, whatever, that the community can use, and that it doesn't destroy the confidence that the community has in law enforcement or the media. So I think if I'm in a room full of journalists, as I am now, I think our main focus should be making sure that we serve the community. And when we do that, then it makes us more honest, it makes us more factual, And it helps us in some cases to understand why we can't release that video, or why you shouldn't put Rob's face on the air without his hat. Or him saying one stupid driver ran into another stupid driver. I mean, all those things come into play. So that's my conversation.
Mm-hmm. Any follow-up to that? Next question. What about using eyewitness statements and sound bites?
Well, I have to tell you, this is something that really troubles me. I don't think we vet people thoroughly enough when they claim to be witnesses. In 1996, here in St. Petersburg, Florida, where there was a lot of violence in the streets after police officers shot a young man behind the wheel of a car. I watched live coverage, and you could see the bullet holes in the windshield of the car. And yet, a woman was interviewed live who claimed to have seen them pull this young man out of the car. She claimed he raised his hands and they shot him dead outside the car. I saw the bullet holes, right? There was no question after the fact. The police officer was in fact on the hood of the car. And the question was this young man trying to run over the officer? Mm-hmm. That eyewitness hadn't seen what she said, but nobody, even with blocks of St. Petersburg in flames, that journalist didn't ask her the important questions. Where were you? Exactly what time was this? What were you doing? How far away were you? Can you show me where you stood? We don't vet people who claim to be witnesses thoroughly enough.
We do too many MOSs, man on the street. A friend of ours, Al Tompkins, refers to it as mountains of a word that begins with S. That we just go out and we just talk to people randomly. But as Scott said, we don't develop a character around them. We don't ask them any questions. And oftentimes, you'll see that they don't even have a name super, because we didn't even get their name, or they didn't want to give their name. And that alone should be a red flag of, do I believe this person?
Well, how should they be vetted then?
You should ask them questions. Where were you? What would you see? That's what journalists do. I mean, we're on the same side in the sense that we're pursuing a truth. I think oftentimes journalists can go out with a truth in mind instead of going out and doing observational reporting of, here's what I see, here's what I hear, here's what people are telling me, so let me attribute that. I think in Ferguson, we reached a tipping point, because there were so many people telling a different story than the cops. And I think everybody just fell on that same bandwagon.
See, and that's something that law enforcement deals with every day. When they have a group of people that are around a crime, if you don't take each person individually, before they get a chance to talk to anyone else and talk to them and find out where they were and what they saw, you're going to get a different story, because they influence each other.
So media can take a lesson from law enforcement
Yes.
here.
You have to be very careful, and once you've interviewed everyone, and that's sometimes I tell the officers, share that with the media, that this is taking a while because you had 15 people inside the home. You have to isolate each one of them, interview each one individually so that you can figure out exactly what happened. And sometimes with the media, I know that as a reporter, I didn't have time to do that.
And I will say, as a reporter, I can remember being told, we can't share that with you, and I would ask, can you at least tell me why you can't share that with me? And the answer, unfortunately, was often no.
Right.
But understanding why you can't share it would really help me make a decision. You're asking me not to do my job. You're asking me to withhold information. Help me justify what you're asking of me.
Sometimes, and here's what I find very interesting about video of the wars and video of law enforcement tactics and all that, I think there's a line that we shouldn't cross. I think we don't need to expose all of our secrets to the criminals. We don't need to expose all of our secrets to other countries that we're fighting. I think it's gotten so out of control that they want to know all the intricate details of how we function. And constitutionally, we don't have to break the Constitution or violate the Constitution by not giving you every single tactic that we use to catch you. Because we expose every single tactic, now we're fighting a whole different war. Now we got to create more, and there's nothing new under the sun as far as I'm concerned. But we end up having to change direction because they know exactly what direction we're going into. So no, we're not going to expose everything. And to the comment about the MOS or the personal, listen, here's what I know. They want that out. You have deadlines. You want the best story possible. So if Channel 7, Channel 4, Channel 2 reports it, Channel 4 wants to be the best, and they report it. They want to sound the best, look the best, and if they can get the most exciting person, I don't care if their hair's all over their head, that's a fact. I don't care if they have teeth, that's a fact. I don't care what they smell like, look like. We want to put them out because they're going to give us a statement because they were standing here and the lady said he was outside the car and he shot them all in the head and all that. And actually all that's not true because it sounds good.
And I have to say, a lot of the responsibility falls on management, on jobs of the sort that Lane and I have held, running newsrooms, where, you know, we expect, you know, I want some eyewitness sound. And, you know, if we say that and seem unreasonable in our expectations, and we don't say, by the way, I also want you to ask good questions of people who claim to be eyewitnesses, and let's remember the kinds of questions we're talking about. We're not doing our job, so the reporter gets blamed for it, but reporters in the field can feel a tremendous amount of pressure to produce a certain amount or a certain kind of content, and it falls to managers and leaders to clarify what the expectations are and to keep them appropriate.
Well, it's obvious we could have this conversation go on for quite some time, but we have reached that point that I need to ask for your final thoughts, and so we can finish our conversation. Yolanda, I'll start with you.
Well, I think from a law enforcement side, it is important to have policies in place in dealing with the media and to be as transparent as possible and still be able to do our job. And from the media side, I think it doesn't always have to be adversarial. I mean, I think there are many times when the media and law enforcement can work together and still, you know, reach their own goals.
Very good. Scott?
There is such a thing as bad behavior by police officers, and there is such a thing as bad behavior by journalists. And I think we ought to hold ourselves and one another individually accountable. I don't think we ought to generalize about an entire profession or craft based on the worst behavior that we see.
Lane?
Conversation, in that we need to get the journalists and the chiefs or the lieutenants in a room and have them talk at a non-crisis moment. So we're talking about how we can trust each other and where our ground rules are before we're dealing with something that we simply don't have time to think.
Harold?
I think that we should take a look at collectively who we're serving, and that is the community, absolutely unequivocally. The news media goes out and the community takes a look at it. I think it's something more important than money. Lives are more important than money. So when we get information, it should be factual, it should be up to date, but we should make sure this information serves the community as well as everyone involved.
Well, thank you. That's all the time we have for today. On behalf of my guests, Harold Rochon, Yolanda Fernandez, Scott Libben, and Lane Mickelson, I'm Stan Rhodes. Thanks for watching Law Enforcement and Media Today, the complexity of credible coverage.